Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm supposed to look in the camera, not in the little square that has my cute little face on it. And we're going to talk about the transformative power of poetry, and how reading poetry changed my life. So this is my second or third YouTube video, and most of my videos are about poetry. And I became a poet at a very, very young age. And ever since I fell in love with poetry, I have been a transformed person, and I've been a happier person and a brighter person. And so the story of how I fell in love with poetry is I was 7 years old, and I've been saying I wanted to be a writer since I was old enough to talk, and I started talking at 10 months. So for my mom, that was really weird, because it's like, why does this 2-year-old know what a songwriter is, and how did they learn to tell me about it? That's kind of creepy, like second life, back from the dead, ooh woo. Did I just say ooh woo on the internet? I'm so sorry. But basically, it was sort of like my whole life I've known that I wanted to be a writer. But things really changed when I moved from New Jersey to Tennessee. And I'm a very proud Tennessean. I am not in New Jersey. There's nothing wrong with New Jersey. It's like one of my top 7 favorite states. But Tennessee is my favorite state. I love Tennessee, even though the government is horrible. And so I love it now, but at the time I was very upset about having to move. And so I wrote my first song, and it was called Stars of Sorrow, See You Tomorrow. And that's a really grim name for a song by a 7-year-old. I don't know where I came up with that one, but I wrote it and I shared it with my mom and my grandma and my dad and all my family members. And they were so impressed with this song that I had written at 7 years old. And I don't have it anymore, but I had it for a very long time. And it was not a bad song, all things considered. And in that same year, I discovered this poet called Shel Silverstein. And Shel Silverstein was a really cool guy. He was like a jazz musician, and he had a killer beard. And if you've ever seen his author photo on the back of any of his books, man was hot. Weirdly hot for a children's poet. Weird. You'd think he'd be like Mr. Rogers or something, wearing a little sweater vest, but no. This man is sprawled out on the back cover of his book, and he's like, I'm Shel Silverstein and I'm sexy. And he really, it was wild. Not back then, but now that I'm an adult and I look at the cover, I'm like, that man this is an interesting thing on the children's book cover. But I discovered Shel Silverstein, and I really fell into a world of poetry. And I started writing more and more, and I fell in love with rhyme, and I fell in love with rhythm. And from that time period forward, from 7 years old on, I have been a really deep lover of poetry and in the written word. And then as I grew older, I became a lover of the spoken word. And it really changed everything about how I viewed the world and society. So, poetry was not just something I liked to read. It was also an emotional outlet for me. So I got bullied really badly in high school, and whenever I was struggling with Boo Hillsborough, yes, my friend who's off camera says Boo Hillsborough. Love you, Dr. Reese, but also Boo Hillsborough. And I got bullied a lot, also in middle school, but mostly high school. And poetry was the way that I escaped from that world. And it gave me an emotional outlet, and it gave me some joy back when I was miserable. Every day I got up for school and I was late because I just lied in bed thinking, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. And I made it eventually because my dad had to go to work, so I had to go to school. But poetry was the reason I got up every day. And poetry was the reason I decided that keeping going was worth it. And so poetry really did change my life for the better. And I will be eternally grateful to poetry for how much it helped me. Poetry was really vital to my growth as a student and as a teacher because I have ADHD and dyslexia and also dyscalculia, if you've ever heard of that. It's like dyslexia, but with math. And so I struggled really hard in certain subjects in school, but I never struggled in English because it was sort of my hyperfixation at the time. For the longest time, I was obsessed with English. Like anything to do with writing or reading or that kind of stuff, I loved it. And I was like a voracious reader, and I was really into creating and cultivating worlds. So, over the course of my schooling career, I read thousands of books. I wrote a science fiction book where I developed an entire elaborate world that I will probably explain on here one day, just because I want someone to see that world and to understand like what I was doing for all those years. It's really fun and exciting. It's about dimension hopping. I was doing dimension hopping before it was cool, just for the record. Way before, what's the movie called? Ratatouille. That's not what the movie is called, but she makes a joke about Ratatouille where it's a raccoon in a chef's hat. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Way before Everything Everywhere All at Once, I was doing dimension hopping. And I was like 10 years old and I was killing that thing. I had developed an entire science fiction world. I had a whole plot. I had a whole thing. And poetry and writing were my places for intellectual growth and development. And it was how I evolved as a person. And every time I grew or I changed or I had a dream about my teeth falling out, which is a very classic dream you have when you're changing as a person. And I had that dream a lot in middle and high school. I would write a poem, and that poem or that story, but usually a poem, would help me grow and evolve into the next iteration of myself. And I never wrote more poetry than when I got diagnosed with my mental illness. I had to be 16 or 17 years old, and I was miserable. I was extremely unwell. I jumped out of a moving car on the highway. I was fine, but I was in a bad mental state. And through poetry, I came back from the literal darkest point in my life, and I blossomed into a nationally recognized poet and performer. And without poetry, I don't know if I would have survived high school, let alone become the artist I am today, who is a bestseller and a public speaker and someone who gets to write poetry and read poetry and create professionally. It's an honor and a blessing and a gift. Poetry has also given me strong ties to the humanity of other people. Through reading other people's poetry, it sort of taught me that I can see the humanity and I can find the humanity in anyone. And it made me an activist. So ever since I wrote my first spoken word poem in 7th grade, it was called, what was it called? It was about a girl who discovers she's beautiful for the first time, who was not pretty before. And it talks about how becoming beautiful can change the way the world perceives you and how it can damage the part of you that existed before the world thought you were beautiful. How it can damage the self you knew before you thought you were beautiful. And that was my first sort of public speech, my first public performance on feminism and like women's rights. it was called Plain Jane. That's what it was called. And the first line was, "It's a sad day when a plain Jane's daydream of being beautiful is realized. It's a day she must harmonize with the society that ostracized her just days before. Now they adore her for a beauty skin deep. Where there once was a beautiful soul, there is no more. Her sanity replaced with vanity, her soul replaced with corruption and immorality. It causes a disruption, this corruption of her beautiful mind. Now in her place you'll find a puppet of society, free of need for sobriety, from the high inducing ways of every bandwagon craze, telling people who they should be." And it goes on for a little bit. It's a whole poem. But that was how old was I? I had to be 12. That was my 12-year-old self's first foray into fighting for somebody else's rights or fighting for a cause. And I fought for a lot of causes since then. I really am passionate about climate change. I'm really passionate about Palestine. But I'm also really passionate about Black history and education. I ran a nonprofit in high school where I discussed Black history and spoken word poetry as a teaching tool for students from low-income backgrounds, as a way for helping them progress in their language learning and their English learning capacities and abilities. And I worked with a really great group of kids when I was in high school, and those kids are all poets now. And they're in middle school now, and they still write poetry after all these years because of the work we did when I was in high school. And I'm planning to start that nonprofit back up. We worked with Aiken Elementary School, and I'd like to work with another local elementary school. And I only did that because of poetry. So poetry has changed my life for not just for the better, but as they say in Wicked, for good. And that's my take on how reading poetry has changed my life and has made my life completely different and completely better. Thank you for watching. I'll post another video sometime next week. Subscribe, like the video if you feel like it, or if you don't feel like it, don't. Bye!